My name is Gabe, and today I want to talk about reboots. No, not that, though. That show is great, and I should totally talk about it someday. I mean, when a franchise starts over. Specifically, I'm talking about movie reboots, but I assume a lot of what I'm going to talk about applies either way. In order to make this clear, I'm going to talk about 4 reboots in particular. Note, The Batman, since it's honestly what put the topic in my head. Spider-Man, because Spider-Man's awesome. Disney's The Lion King, and Maleficent. I've got reasons why I picked these to talk about specifically, because I feel they demonstrate my point. I also want to mention something very clear in this video. This isn't a review of what we're talking about. What I am saying about whatever I'm talking about is only as it's attributed as a reboot, not a movie in themselves. Something can be a bad reboot and be a good movie. Be a good reboot, yet a bad movie. And I will leave it to you to decide whether or not the movies being discussed today fit that topic. My main focus today is, when is a reboot okay, and when is it, let's be real, just a cash grab? I reiterate one last time, this is nothing to do with the quality of the movies. Just the question of whether or not they should. First off, what defines a reboot? Since I feel knowing what something is allows one to discuss whether or not something qualifies. Well, I propose, for simplicity's sake, only 2 rules. Rule number 1, the reboot must retell the beginning of the story. Ultimately, for it to be a reboot and not a spin-off, you've got to be coming from the same place. Otherwise, it's just another story with characters of the same name at best. Number 2, it has to be different. This might sound contradictory, but what I mean by this is, if a reboot is a scene-for-scene recreation of the original, where, well, then all of a sudden it's just a retelling. It makes no sense to call it a reboot, since nothing's changed, and if a sequel were made, the sequel would able to be just as easily a sequel to the original. This is important. When I say retelling, by the way, or when I say that it has to tell the same story, to be more specific, what I mean is it has to start at the same starting point. Because obviously, both Spider-Man and Batman do not tell the same story at all. Yet they're still reboots. But they do come from the same or similar enough of a starting point that you can say, yes, this is Spider-Man, yes, this is Batman. Now that we've established what is a reboot, let's talk about why to reboot. Once again, I think this could be quite simple. There are 2 reasons to reboot. Let's say 3, but really 2. Reason number 1. Technology has improved, and you can now show the story in a way you could not before. And that means you can have maybe some effects or animation that weren't present in the original. You can have some high-flying stunts that they could never do in the original. Or you can just have fun with it in a way you couldn't before. Reason number 2. There is something you can't say, you can't do with the original continuity. Now, there are many reasons, and we'll get to one big one in a little bit, but when I say something you can't do, I mean, you've set these rules to follow in the original, and all of a sudden, these rules are constraining you. So, what to do? Reset it. reset it so you can just remove those rules and do what you actually want. For example, if you make a superhero story in a world where that hero is the only one who exists, well then all of a sudden it makes sense to reboot that hero if you could then put that hero in a world where other heroes also exist. Yes, this does mean I am calling Batman v Superman a good reboot. But like I said, good reboot does not mean good movie. The idea of putting Batman in a world where he can interact with other heroes, great. The execution, not so much. Sorry, I know I was going to put my own opinion to that, but I just realized what I was saying as I was saying it. Anyways, so that's a good reason. And now, let's get a little more specific and maybe shock a few people. Or maybe not. 2.5. Like I said, there are really two, but the second reason can be split into two. So sometimes there's stuff you just couldn't do because of the rules set in the world, but sometimes it ain't the rules set in the world that were constraining you. It were the rules set by the higher-ups. That is to say, you may have wanted to push the envelope a bit. You wanted to have a message of some kind, or just show some things that whatever company was under you wasn't quite happy with you showing. I want to once again say, there have been many cases of this being done for good and for ill. But the point I'm trying to get at is, these are valid reasons to reboot. And therefore, in my book, as a reboot specifically, anything done under this name would be a good reboot. Okay, now that we've set the criteria, let's analyze the 4 movies I took an interest in. Let's start with The Lion King. So, using our 2 criteria, let's see how The Lion King fits. Does it say anything new? No. And while it is live action, you could say the animals look good, does the technology really do something that they could not do with animation? Again, no. In fact, it seems to do less. Which means, all in all, it is just a bad reboot. Now, let's go with my other Disney pick, Maleficent. Low-key confession, I actually like this movie. Maybe a little biased there. So, does it use technology that didn't have before, or rather, no, but the big thing, though, is it is retelling the same story from an alternate point of view, which is good, which is a good reason to retell a story. It's allowing us to see things come to fruition, and honestly, I like it. Obviously. Now, let's look at our superhero flicks. The Batman. I just established that Batman v Superman's a good reboot. Ugh, hate to say that. But the Batman, let's see. Considering it was only a few years after Batman v Superman, it doesn't have any new technology to speak of. It just doesn't. And in the same boat, nothing about its story couldn't have been told in either the Nolanverse or the Batman v Superverse. Neither of them have even taken out the Riddler for anything yet, so they could have even done that. There's nothing, I hate to say it, special about the Batman, at least in regards to a reason to reboot. Let's be real, the reason's simple. Snyder's DCEU wasn't doing so hot, and the guys at DC at the DC movie stuff have been trying to really figure something out. To their detriment, I think. I think I'm going to make another video on a similar subject, because it's an interesting topic that I think is totally worth talking about. But I'm not ready for it yet. Anyways, now let's look at Spider-Man. Specifically the Spider-Man Home trilogy, but I'll take a little stop at the Andrew Garfield trilogy as well, the Amazing Spider-Man, or rather, duology. Now, first off, new tech for Spider-Man Home versus, yeah, I would say yeah. These movies are far enough apart. The big thing, and the thing I even brought up, was, well, that superhero the interaction with other superheroes. Because that wasn't a thing they could do in either the Andrew Garfield or Tobey Maguire movies, it was something they could do here. So they did. But in regards to that, I want to talk about something else. The amazing duology. I don't think it's necessarily a bad reboot. Maybe. Rather, I think it took a different angle. Which means it at least did something. But it's hard to say for sure whether... Although... It's a complicated case. Which is why I want to highlight it in the first place. And I think I'm demonstrating here. On one hand, there is no question behind motives. It's a cash grab through and through. Sony wanted to keep the Spider-Man rights, and they needed to put a movie out. But, at the very least, they approached things from a different angle than the original Tobey Maguire trilogy. Unfortunately, it didn't gel with people because I think they did rush into it too much, which comes to something of another rule I want to put on reboots. The too soon rule. This is not a rule about whether a reboot is worth it. This is just a tip to any filmmakers out there to whether or not folks will watch it in the first place or like it. The sooner you are to the thing you're rebooting, the less likely it is, because people will always be comparing it to the original. That was the amazing duology's downside. The original was so fresh in folks' minds that, well, that's all they really thought about. And that's a barrier that the home trilogy managed to break, but I imagine not without difficulty for a lot of people. You especially shouldn't reboot something while the original's still running. That is definitely too soon, in my opinion. Anyways, this rambly little video was, I hope, fun, and I hope it gave you some idea into some thoughts I rattle around my brain. But if you liked it, why not leave it a like? If you want to see more like it, do subscribe. But more importantly than anything else, have a good night.